Dennis Erickson was 34 years old, and the woman he loved more than life itself was being lowered into the ground while her mother stood 3 feet away from him, checking her watch like she had a lunch reservation to keep. 3 days earlier, his wife Vivian had died. Cancer. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer that went from unexplained stomach pain to you have 6 months in the span of a single doctor's appointment. That was 8 months ago in late March. They got 2 extra months together. 2 months of stolen time where every sunrise felt like a gift and every sunset felt like a countdown. Vivian passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in November 2024, holding Dennis's hand in the bedroom of their home in suburban Charlotte, North Carolina. She was 32 years old. Now Dennis stood at Oak Hill Cemetery under a gray sky that threatened rain, watching the casket descend. He couldn't stop crying. His shoulders shook. His chest heaved. He didn't care who saw him break down. Vivian deserved every tear. She deserved more than tears. She deserved to still be alive. "Pull yourself together," a voice hissed in his ear. "You're making a spectacle." Dennis turned to see his mother-in-law, Dolores Whitmore, glaring at him with those ice blue eyes that Vivian had inherited but had filled with warmth instead of frost. Dolores was 61, dressed in a black Chanel suit that probably cost more than Dennis made in a month as a high school history teacher. Her perfectly styled silver hair didn't move in the November wind. Everything about Dolores Whitmore was controlled, calculated, and cold. "I just lost my wife," Dennis managed to say through his tears. "And I lost my daughter," Dolores snapped back, though her eyes were dry as desert sand. "But I'm not embarrassing her memory by sobbing like a child in front of everyone." Dennis looked around at the everyone Dolores referenced. There were maybe 40 people scattered around the gravesite. Vivian's father had died when she was 12, so Dolores was the only parent present. Vivian's younger brother Jason stood with his wife, both looking uncomfortable. A handful of Vivian's college friends had flown in, some neighbors. Dennis's own parents had driven up from Charleston and stood nearby. His mother's arm linked through his father's, both of them crying openly. A few of Dennis's teacher colleagues had come to pay their respects. These were people who loved Vivian, people who were supposed to be united in grief. "The service is over," Dolores announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "There will be a reception at my home for close family and friends. Dennis, I need to speak with you privately before you leave." Dennis nodded numbly. He didn't want to talk to Dolores. He didn't want to do anything except go home and crawl into bed and smell Vivian's pillow one more time before her scent faded completely. But Dolores wasn't really asking. She never asked. She commanded. The crowd began to disperse. People approached Dennis one by one, offering condolences that blurred together into a stream of, "I'm so sorry," and "She was wonderful," and "If you need anything." Dennis accepted each hug mechanically, his mind somewhere else entirely. His mother squeezed his hand and whispered, "Do you want us to stay?" "I'll be okay," Dennis lied. "I'll see you at the reception." When the last mourner had walked away toward their cars, Dennis found himself alone with Dolores at Vivian's grave. The cemetery workers had respectfully withdrawn, giving them privacy. The November wind picked up, scattering dead leaves across the grass. "I'll be direct," Dolores said, her tone businesslike. "Now that Vivian is gone, there are practical matters we need to address." Dennis stared at her. "Practical matters? We just buried her." "Which is precisely why we need to discuss this now, before things become complicated." Dolores pulled her coat tighter against the wind. "The house." "What about the house?" "Vivian's house," Dolores clarified. "The one she purchased before you two married. I assume you've been living there, but now that she's gone, we need to make arrangements for you to move out." Dennis felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "Move out? That's my home. That's where Vivian and I lived together for 5 years." "A home that Vivian bought with money from her trust fund," Dolores said coldly. "Money from her father's estate. Money that had nothing to do with you." This was true, technically. When Dennis and Vivian had gotten married 6 years ago, Vivian had owned the house outright. It was a beautiful 3-bedroom craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood called Ashford Park. Vivian had purchased it 2 years before they met, when she was working as a pediatric nurse at Carolina Medical Center. The house had cost $385,000, and Vivian had paid cash for it using money from a trust fund her late father had established. Dennis, meanwhile, had been living in a small apartment and working on his teaching certification. He made $42,000 a year as a first-year teacher. Vivian made about $68,000 as an experienced nurse. The economic gap between them had never mattered to Vivian. She loved Dennis for who he was, not what he earned. But it had always mattered to Dolores. "I never asked Vivian to put me on the deed," Dennis said quietly. "She wanted to keep the house in her name for financial planning purposes. Our attorney recommended it for estate tax reasons." "How convenient for you to remember that now," Dolores sneered. "In any case, the house belonged to Vivian, which means it now becomes part of her estate. And since Vivian didn't leave a will—" "She did leave a will," Dennis interrupted. Dolores's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me?" "Vivian made a will 2 years ago when she first got diagnosed. We both did." Dennis's voice was steady now despite the tears still streaming down his face. "Our attorney helped us get everything in order." Something flickered across Dolores's face. Surprise, maybe, or anger. "I see. And I suppose in this alleged will, Vivian left everything to you?" "I'm her husband, Dolores. That's generally how it works." "Her husband of 6 years," Dolores said, her voice dripping with disdain. 6 years during which you contributed essentially nothing to her life. You made what, $45,000 a year teaching? While my daughter supported you?" "I make $52,000 now, actually," Dennis said, though he hated himself for feeling defensive about it. "And Vivian never supported me. We split expenses proportionally based on our incomes. We had a partnership." "A partnership," Dolores repeated mockingly. "Is that what you call a situation where a successful young woman pays most of the bills while her underachieving husband plays at being a teacher?" The words hit Dennis like slaps. This was vintage Dolores. She'd never approved of Dennis. From the moment Vivian had brought him home to meet her family, Dolores had made her disapproval clear. Dennis wasn't wealthy enough, wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't good enough for her daughter. Vivian's father had come from old money, not spectacular wealth, but comfortable. He'd built a successful regional insurance business before dying of a heart attack at 48. He'd left behind a substantial estate that Dolores had managed with an iron fist. Vivian and her brother Jason had each received trust funds worth about $800,000. Dolores had kept the rest, including the insurance business, which she'd sold for a significant profit. Dolores had always envisioned Vivian marrying someone from their social circle, a doctor perhaps, or a successful entrepreneur. Instead, Vivian had fallen in love with a middle-class teacher who grew up in a modest 3-bedroom ranch in Charleston, whose parents were a postal worker and a librarian, and who thought that spending more than $70 on a dinner was extravagant. "I loved Vivian," Dennis said simply, "and she loved me. That's all that mattered." "Love," Dolores scoffed. "Love doesn't pay mortgages or build futures. Though in this case, I suppose it didn't need to, since Vivian had already paid for the house." "Why are you doing this?" Dennis asked. "Why now? Can't we at least get through the funeral before you start attacking me?" "I'm not attacking you. I'm being practical." Dolores checked her watch again. "The reception starts in 45 minutes. I'm simply making it clear that you need to start making plans to vacate Vivian's property. I'll give you 30 days, which is more than generous." 30 days? Dennis felt the surreal horror of the moment crashing over him. "You want me out of my home in 30 days? "It's not your home," Dolores said coldly. "It never was. And now that Vivian is gone, there's no reason for you to continue living there. My attorney will be in touch with the formal notice." "Your attorney?" "Dolores, whatever Vivian's will says, wills can be contested," Dolores cut him off, "especially when there are questions about undue influence or financial manipulation." Dennis felt his blood run cold. "Are you seriously suggesting I manipulated Vivian?" "I'm suggesting that a woman with terminal cancer might not have been in the best state of mind to make major financial decisions. I'm suggesting that a will drafted under such circumstances might not reflect her true wishes. And I'm suggesting that any judge would understand a mother's concern about her daughter's estate being seized by an opportunistic spouse. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded family betrayal, shocking inheritance battles, and ultimate justice against entitled wealth? Like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new stories here every day, each one more intense than the last one you watched. And tell me where you are watching from. Dennis took a deep breath, trying to control his shaking hands. This is insane. You can't just throw me out of my home. Watch me. Dolores turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Dennis, don't bother coming to the reception. You're not welcome. It's for people who actually cared about Vivian, not opportunists who saw her as a meal ticket. She walked away across the cemetery grass, her heels clicking on the paved pathway that led to the parking lot. Dennis stood alone at Vivian's grave, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. His wife was dead, and her mother was trying to throw him out of his home before Vivian's body was even cold. Dennis looked down at the fresh earth covering Vivian's casket. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry you can't be here to see this. You'd be furious." Vivian had always run interference between Dennis and her mother. She'd been the buffer, the translator, the peacemaker. She loved Dolores despite Dolores's flaws, because that's who Vivian was. She loved people even when they didn't deserve it. But she'd also been fiercely protective of Dennis. Whenever Dolores made one of her cutting remarks about Dennis's career or income, Vivian would shut it down immediately. "He's doing exactly what he's meant to do," Vivian would say. "He's changing kids' lives every single day. That's worth more than any amount of money." But Vivian was gone now, and without her protection, Dennis was facing Dolores's full wrath alone. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands and called his attorney, David Chen. David had helped them draft their wills 2 years ago. He was young, only 36, but sharp and thorough. Dennis had liked him immediately. "Dennis," David answered on the second ring, his voice gentle. "I'm so sorry about Vivian. I was planning to call you tomorrow to discuss." "Dolores just told me I have 30 days to move out of the house," Dennis said flatly. "She says she's going to contest the will." There was a long pause. "She said that? At the funeral? At the cemetery? Literally standing at Vivian's grave?" "Jesus," David muttered. Okay, first of all, breathe. Second of all, don't panic. Vivian's will is ironclad. I drafted it myself. Everything goes to you. The house, her remaining trust fund assets, her retirement accounts, everything. She was very clear about her wishes. Dolores says she'll claim undue influence, that Vivian wasn't in her right mind because of the cancer. Vivian was diagnosed 2 years ago and was completely lucid when we drafted the will. We have medical documentation of her mental capacity. We even had her doctor provide a statement confirming she understood the decision she was making. Dolores can contest all she wants, but she won't win. Dennis felt a tiny bit of relief. She also said the house was Vivian's property and I have no right to it. The house is now part of Vivian's estate, which passes to you as her sole beneficiary. Once probate is complete, the deed will transfer to your name. Dolores has no claim to it whatsoever. How long does probate take? In North Carolina? Typically 4 to 6 months if there are no complications. If Dolores decides to contest, it could take longer, maybe a year. But Dennis, I need to be honest with you. She's not going to win. The will is solid. I designed it specifically to be contest-proof because, well, Vivian warned me about her mother. Dennis almost laughed despite everything. Of course, Vivian had warned David about Dolores. Vivian had known exactly what her mother was capable of. "What do I do now?" Dennis asked. "You go home," David said firmly. "You do not move out. You do not let Dolores intimidate you into leaving your property. That house is legally yours, even if it takes a few months for the paperwork to reflect that. If she sends you any formal notices, forward them to me immediately. And Dennis, don't engage with her. Don't argue. Don't try to reason with her. Just refer everything to me." "Okay," Dennis said. "Thank you, David. I'll call you tomorrow to schedule a time to go over everything in detail. For now, just get through today. And again, I'm so sorry about Vivian." After they hung up, Dennis stood at the grave for a few more minutes. The cemetery workers were hovering at a respectful distance, waiting to finish filling in the plot. Dennis knew he should leave, but he couldn't quite make his feet move. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly to Vivian's grave. She wants me gone, but I'm staying. This was our home. These are our memories. I'm not letting her take that away." The wind picked up again, colder now. The first drops of rain began to fall. Dennis turned and walked toward the parking lot, his mind reeling. He didn't go to Dolores's reception. Instead, he drove home to the house in Ashford Park, the house where he and Vivian had built their life together, where they'd painted the walls and planted the garden and argued about what color to make the guest room, where Vivian had received her diagnosis and where they'd spent her final weeks making every moment count. The house was dark when Dennis arrived. He'd left that morning before dawn to get to the funeral home. The November afternoon was already fading into evening. He parked in the driveway and sat in his car for a long moment, looking at the craftsman-style home with its wide front porch and the rocking chairs where he and Vivian used to sit on summer evenings. Inside, everything was exactly as they'd left it. Vivian's reading glasses were still on the coffee table next to her book club selection she'd never gotten to finish. Her coffee mug was in the kitchen sink. Her slippers were by the bedroom door. Dennis collapsed on the couch and finally let himself fall apart completely. He cried until he couldn't breathe, until his head pounded and his throat was raw. He cried for Vivian, for the future they'd never have, for the children they'd talked about but never got to create, for the 50th anniversary they joked about celebrating. And somewhere beneath the grief, beneath the overwhelming loss, there was anger. Anger at Dolores for her cruelty, anger at her timing, anger at her entitled assumption that she could simply take away everything Vivian had built. They had no idea what was coming. Dolores thought she could bully Dennis into submission because she'd always seen him as weak, as lesser, as someone beneath her daughter's station. She thought his grief and his modest income made him powerless. But Dolores had made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated how well Vivian had prepared for exactly this scenario. Dennis stood and walked to the home office they'd set up in the spare bedroom. He opened the filing cabinet where they kept important documents and pulled out a manila folder labeled Estate Planning. Inside were copies of their wills, advance directives, power of attorney documents, and property records. He found what he was looking for, a copy of the house deed. He'd looked at it a few times over the years, but had never really studied it carefully. Now he read every word. The property was purchased by Vivian Elizabeth Whitmore on March 15, 2018 for $385,000. The deed showed Vivian as the sole owner. Everything was exactly as Dolores had described. The house had been Vivian's property, purchased with her money before they married. But then Dennis noticed something. In the bottom corner of the deed was a notation dated January 8, 2023, less than 2 years ago. It referenced a deed modification filed with the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds. Dennis's heart started racing. He searched through the folder until he found another document, this one newer. It was indeed a deed modification, signed by Vivian and notarized. As he read the document, Dennis felt tears spring to his eyes again. But this time they were different. These weren't tears of grief or anger. They were tears of gratitude. Because Vivian, in her infinite wisdom and love, had taken care of everything. The deed, modification, executed on January 8, 2023, just 3 months after her diagnosis, had changed the ownership structure of the house. It was no longer in Vivian's name alone. The property was now held in both their names as tenants by the entirety, a special form of joint ownership available only to married couples in North Carolina. And crucially, it included survivorship rights. Dennis knew what this meant. He'd researched property law when they were doing their estate planning. Tenancy by the entirety meant that upon Vivian's death, the property automatically transferred to Dennis. It didn't go through probate. It didn't become part of Vivian's estate. It simply became his, immediately and irrevocably. Dolores could contest the will all she wanted. She could hire expensive attorneys and drag things out in court. But none of that mattered when it came to the house. Because the house wasn't part of Vivian's estate. It was already Dennis's property. It had been the moment Vivian died. Dennis sank into the desk chair, holding the deed modification and shaking hands. Vivian had done this. Vivian had known that Dolores would try something like this. She'd known her mother well enough to predict exactly what would happen, and she'd protected Dennis in the one way that mattered most. She'd made sure he'd never lose their home. At the bottom of the deed modification, Vivian had written a note in her neat handwriting. For Dennis, this house is ours, and it always will be. All my love, S. Dennis traced the words with his finger, fresh tears streaming down his face. Even in death, Vivian was taking care of him. Even knowing what was coming, she'd thought ahead and made sure he'd be okay. Tomorrow, Dolores would probably send her formal eviction notice. She'd probably be smug about it, confident that her wealth and her attorneys would crush Dennis easily. But what happened next would shock her. Because when Dolores tried to claim the house as part of Vivian's estate, she was going to learn that it wasn't part of the estate at all. The deed was already in Dennis's name. The property was already his. And there wasn't a single thing Dolores could do about it. Dennis carefully returned the documents to the filing cabinet. He would call David tomorrow and make sure everything was properly documented and filed. But for tonight, he just needed to sit with this knowledge. Vivian had loved him. Vivian had protected him. And Vivian had made absolutely sure that her mother couldn't take away the home they'd built together. "Thank you," Dennis whispered into the empty office. "Thank you, Vivian. I love you so much." Outside, the November rain fell steadily. Inside, Dennis sat in the home that was irrevocably, legally, and permanently his, and began to understand that sometimes the best protection against cruelty was simply preparation. Dolores wanted a war, but she'd already lost, and she didn't even know it yet. The formal eviction notice arrived by courier, the EEE. Next morning at 9:30, Dennis was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee he couldn't taste and staring at nothing, when the doorbell rang. He signed for the thick envelope with numb fingers and carried it back inside. The letter was printed on expensive cream-colored stationery with the letterhead, Whitmore and Associates Legal Group. Dennis almost laughed. Of course, Dolores had her own law firm on retainer. The letter was signed by a senior partner named Harrison Whitmore, Dolores's late husband's cousin, Dennis realized. Even her attorneys were family members. The letter stated, in formal legal language, that Dennis Erickson was occupying property belonging to the estate of Vivian Elizabeth Whitmore Erickson and was required to vacate within 30 days. Failure to comply would result in formal eviction proceedings. It was dated the day of Vivian's funeral, meaning Dolores had instructed her attorney to draft it before Vivian was even buried. Dennis set the letter aside and called David Chen. "I got the eviction notice," Dennis said when David answered. "Forward it to me. I'll respond today." David's voice was calm and confident. "Have you looked at the deed modification Vivian filed?" "I found it last night. The property is in both our names as tenants by the entirety." "Exactly, which means Dolores's eviction notice is legally meaningless. You can't be evicted from property you own. I'm going to send a response to her attorney explaining that the house transferred to you automatically upon Vivian's death and is not part of her probate estate." "How do you think she'll react?" "Badly," David said bluntly. "But that's not your problem. Let me handle the legal side. You just focus on taking care of yourself." After they hung up, Dennis tried to go about his day. He'd taken bereavement leave from school, 2 weeks that the principal had granted without hesitation. His colleagues had been supportive. His students had sent cards. Teaching had always been Dennis's calling. He loved it, despite the modest salary that Dolores found so contemptible. But right now, he couldn't imagine standing in front of a classroom and pretending to be okay. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "How are you holding up, sweetheart? Your father and I are worried about you." Dennis typed back, "I'm okay. Dolores sent an eviction notice. My attorney is handling it." The response came immediately. "That woman is unbelievable. What can we do?" "Nothing right now. Just knowing you're there helps." His mother sent back a heart emoji, which made Dennis smile despite everything. His parents had never had much money, but they'd given him something Dolores's wealth could never buy: unconditional love and support. The rest of the day crawled by in a haze of grief and exhaustion. Dennis tried to eat but couldn't. He tried to sleep but lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every corner of the house held memories of Vivian, her laugh echoing from the kitchen, her voice calling up the stairs, the way she'd curl up on the couch with her feet tucked under her, reading nursing journals and medical thrillers with equal enthusiasm. The next morning, David called back. "I sent the response to Dolores's attorney. I included a copy of the deed modification and a letter explaining the legal situation. I made it very clear that any attempt to claim the property as part of Vivian's estate would fail, and that continued harassment could result in a countersuit. What did they say? I haven't heard back yet. But Dennis, I need to prepare you for something. Dolores isn't going to accept this quietly. When she realizes she can't take the house through the estate, she might try other tactics. Like what? Claiming you coerced Vivian into changing the deed, arguing that she wasn't mentally competent when she signed the modification, trying to prove fraud or undue influence. None of it will work, but it could drag things out. Dennis felt a headache building behind his eyes. How long could this go on? Depends on how vindictive she wants to be. Could be a few months, could be a year or more if she really pushes it. But Dennis, she will lose. The deed modification is legal, properly executed, and notarized. Vivian was examined by her oncologist that same week, and his notes confirmed she was fully competent. We have everything documented. Vivian thought of everything, Dennis said quietly. She did, David agreed. She told me specifically that she wanted to make sure you'd be protected if anything happened to her. She said her mother would try to take everything, and she wanted to make that impossible. Dennis's eyes burned with fresh tears. Even facing her own mortality, Vivian had been thinking about him, protecting him, making sure he'd have a home in security after she was gone. Thank you, David, for everything. I'm just doing my job. Vivian was a good person, and you were good to her. That's what matters. That afternoon, Dennis's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Dennis, it's Jason, Vivian's younger brother. Dennis hadn't spoken to him since the funeral. Jason was 30 years old, worked in commercial real estate in Atlanta, and had always been cordial to Dennis, if not particularly warm. Dolores's influence ran deep in her children, but Jason had always been less openly hostile than his mother. Hey, Jason, Dennis said carefully. Listen, I heard about what Mom's trying to do, the eviction notice and everything. Jason sounded uncomfortable. I just wanted to say, I think it's messed up. Vivian loved you. She would hate this. Dennis felt a rush of gratitude. Thanks for saying that. I tried talking to Mom about it, but she's not listening. She's convinced you're some kind of gold digger who manipulated Vivian. It's insane. Your mother has never liked me. I know, and I'm sorry. Vivian and I talked about it sometimes. She knew Mom was hard. On you. Jason paused. Look, I can't go against Mom publicly. She controls the family trust and my inheritance. But privately, I want you to know that I think she's wrong. And if there's anything I can do to help without putting myself in her crosshairs, let me know. It wasn't much, but it was something. I appreciate that, Jason. Really. After they hung up, Dennis felt slightly less alone. At least someone in Vivian's family recognized the injustice of what Dolores was doing. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Dennis went through Vivian's things slowly, crying over photographs and old birthday cards. He found a journal she'd kept during her illness, and reading her words felt like hearing her voice again. One entry from January of 2023, right after she'd filed the deed modification, caught his attention. I went to David's office today and changed the deed on the house. Dennis doesn't know yet. I'll tell him when the time is right. I don't want him to think I don't trust him or that I'm planning for the worst. But I know my mother. The second I'm gone, she'll try to take everything from him. She's never believed he loved me for me. And she'll use my death as an excuse to punish him for not being the son-in-law she wanted. So I'm making sure she can't touch our home. This house is Dennis's. It's his security, his sanctuary, his future. Mom can't have it. I won't let her take away the one stable thing in his life after I'm gone. Dennis pressed the journal to his chest and wept. Vivian had known. She'd understood exactly what would happen, and she'd protected him. On the 5th day after the funeral, David called again. Dolores's attorney responded to my letter. And they're not backing down. They're claiming that Vivian was under duress when she signed the deed modification, that you manipulated her during a vulnerable time, and that the document should be voided. That's ridiculous. Vivian made her own decisions. I know, and we can prove it. I've already contacted Dr. Patel, Vivian's oncologist. He's willing to testify that Vivian was fully competent in January 2023 and that there were no signs of cognitive impairment. I've also pulled the notary records. The modification was witnessed by two independent parties at my office, neither of whom had any connection to you. This case has no merit. So what happens now? Dolores's attorney is filing a formal challenge to the deed modification. It'll go before a judge, probably in the next few months. We'll present our evidence, they'll present theirs, which will be nothing but speculation and character attacks, and the judge will rule in our favor. How much is this going to cost? Dennis asked. It was a question he'd been dreading. His teacher's salary didn't leave much room for expensive legal battles. Don't worry about my fees right now. We'll work something out after this is settled. Vivian set up a retainer account for exactly this kind of situation. She knew you'd need legal protection. Of course she had. Vivian had thought of everything. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you have not, because the ending of this story will blow your mind. And drop a comment below telling me what you think Dennis should do next. The weeks crawled by. Thanksgiving came and went. Dennis spent it alone, unable to face the holiday without Vivian. His parents invited him to Charleston, but he couldn't bring himself to leave the house. Christmas decorations appeared in neighbors' yards, but Dennis couldn't imagine celebrating anything. Dolores, meanwhile, escalated her campaign. She started calling Dennis's school, claiming he was mentally unstable and shouldn't be around children. The principal called Dennis personally to assure him that the accusations were baseless and that his job was secure. "We know you're grieving," Principal Hernandez said kindly. "Take all the time you need. Your position will be here when you're ready." Dolores also began spreading rumors in Vivian's social circle. She told Vivian's friends that Dennis had isolated Vivian from her family, that he'd controlled their finances, that he'd pressured her into changing the deed while she was sick and vulnerable. Some of Vivian's friends believed her. Others reached out to Dennis to tell him they knew the truth. One of Vivian's closest friends, a fellow nurse named Jennifer, called Dennis in early December. "I just want you to know that some of us aren't buying Dolores's bullshit," Jennifer said bluntly. "Vivian talked to me about the deed change. She said she was protecting you from her mother. She knew Dolores would pull something like this." "Did she tell you why she did it?" Dennis asked. "She said, 'My mom thinks Dennis married me for money,' which is insane because Dennis couldn't care less about money. But when I'm gone, she's going to try to take everything from him out of spite. I'm making sure that doesn't happen. The house is his. He needs security, and I'm going to make sure he has it." Those were her exact words. Dennis felt his throat tighten. "Thank you for telling me that." "Vivian loved you so much," Jennifer said softly. "Don't let Dolores make you doubt that." The court date was set for mid-January, almost 2 months after Vivian's death. David prepared meticulously, gathering medical records, notary statements, witness testimonies, and financial documents. He built an airtight case showing that Vivian had been fully competent, acting of her own free will, and had explicitly intended to protect Dennis from her mother. Dolores, meanwhile, hired additional attorneys, a team of 3 from a high-powered firm in Charlotte. They filed motion after motion, each one more ridiculous than the last. They demanded Dennis's financial records going back 10 years. They subpoenaed Vivian's medical records and therapist notes. They even tried to claim that Dennis had somehow brainwashed Vivian using psychological manipulation tactics. "They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks," David explained. "It's a common tactic when you don't have a real case. They're hoping to overwhelm us or find some tiny inconsistency they can exploit." Will it work? No, because we have the truth on our side, and the truth is very simple. Vivian owned the house. Vivian added you to the deed. Vivian was legally competent when she did so, and the deed modification was properly executed. Everything else is just noise. But the noise was exhausting. Dennis barely slept. He'd lost 15 pounds. He looked like a ghost of himself. His mother begged him to come home to Charleston for a while, but he refused to leave the house. It felt like surrendering. In early January, Dennis received a letter from Dolores directly, not through her attorneys, but sent to his home. He opened it with trembling hands. The letter was handwritten on Dolores's personal stationery. "Dennis, this has gone on long enough. I'm prepared to offer you a settlement. I will drop all legal challenges to the deed if you agree to sell the house and split the proceeds with me 60-40. You'll walk away with over $200,000, which is far more than you contributed to Vivian's life. This is a generous offer, more than you deserve. If you refuse, I will continue fighting. I have unlimited resources and unlimited time. I will drag this through the courts for years. I will make your life hell. I will destroy your reputation. By the time I'm done, everyone will know what kind of parasite you really are. The choice is yours. Dolores Whitmore. Dennis read the letter twice, his hands shaking with anger. This was Dolores's final card, the threat. She knew she was losing the legal battle, so now she was trying intimidation. He took a photo of the letter and texted it to David. David called back within 5 minutes. Don't respond, don't engage. Forward me the original letter. She's threatening me. I know, which is incredibly stupid of her. This letter proves her motivations. It shows malice and harassment. It actually helps our case. She really thinks I'll take her settlement. She thinks she can bully you into submission. She's used to people folding when she throws money and threats around. But Dennis, you don't have to fold. You're in the right here. The law's on your side. I'm not taking her money, Dennis said firmly. This house is mine. Vivian wanted me to have it. I'm not selling it, and I'm sure as hell not giving her a single dollar. Good, David said, because that's exactly what Vivian would want you to say. The night before the court hearing, Dennis couldn't sleep at all. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Vivian's diagnosis, the 8 months of fighting, the small victories and devastating setbacks, the final weeks when they both knew the end was coming. Vivian's death in this very bedroom, in this very bed, with Dennis holding her hand and whispering that he loved her. And then Dolores's cruelty at the funeral, the eviction notice, the legal battle, the threats and rumors and endless harassment. But through it all, Vivian's love had protected him. The deed modification she'd filed, the careful documentation, the conversations with friends where she'd explained her intentions, even her journal entries. Vivian had built an impenetrable legal fortress around Dennis, and Dolores couldn't break through no matter how hard she tried. Tomorrow in court, that fortress would prove its strength. Dennis got out of bed at dawn and put on his best suit, a navy blue one that Vivian had bought him for their 4th anniversary. She'd said he looked handsome in it. He knotted his tie with careful precision, the way Vivian had taught him. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. He'd aged years in 2 months, but his eyes were clear. His jaw was set. He was ready. David picked him up at 8:30. They drove to the Mecklenburg County Courthouse in downtown Charlotte, a modern building of glass and steel. Dolores was already there when they arrived, surrounded by her legal team. She wore a black St. John's suit and diamond earrings. She looked at Dennis with pure contempt. Dennis looked back at her with something that surprised him. Pity. Because Dolores had lost Vivian too. She'd lost her daughter. And instead of grieving, instead of honoring Vivian's memory, she'd chosen to wage war against the man Vivian loved. She'd chosen cruelty over compassion, greed over grace. They filed into the courtroom. Judge Rebecca Morrison presided, a woman in her mid-50s with sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. She'd reviewed all the filings in advance, David had assured Dennis. She knew the case inside and out. Dolores's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Charles Dennison, spoke first. He painted Dennis as a manipulator, a predator who'd targeted a vulnerable young woman with money. He claimed the deed modification was executed under duress, that Vivian had been confused by her medication, that Dennis had isolated her from her family and controlled her decisions. It was a compelling story. It was also complete fiction. Then David stood up. He was younger than Dennison, less polished, less expensive looking, but when he spoke, his words carried the weight of truth. Your Honor, this case is very simple, David began. Vivian Whitmore Erickson was a competent adult who made a legal modification to her property deed. She did so while healthy. The modification was filed in January 2023, only 3 months after her diagnosis, when she was still working full-time as a nurse and showing no signs of cognitive decline. Her oncologist will testify that she was fully capable of making legal decisions at that time. David presented the medical records, Dr. Patel's statement, the notary witnesses, the journal entries where Vivian explained her reasoning, text messages to friends where Vivian explicitly stated she was protecting Dennis from her mother, Mrs. Whitmore is not challenging this deed modification because she believes there was fraud, David continued. She's challenging it because she disapproves of her daughter's choice of husband. She's using the legal system to punish Mr. Erickson for not being wealthy enough, not being prestigious enough, not being the son-in-law she wanted. But her disapproval doesn't invalidate Vivian's legal right to do what she wanted with her own property. Dolores's attorney objected, called it inflammatory. Judge Morrison overruled. David called Dr. Patel to the stand. The oncologist was in his 50s, Indian American, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He testified that Vivian had been his patient for 8 months, that she'd been sharp and clear-headed until her final weeks, and that in January 2023, she'd shown absolutely no signs of cognitive impairment or confusion. "Did you discuss the deed modification with Ms. Erickson?" David asked. "Yes. She mentioned it during an appointment. She said she wanted to make sure her husband would be taken care of if anything happened to her. She was very clear about her intentions. She said, and I remember this specifically, my mother is going to try to take everything from Dennis when I'm gone, and I won't let that happen." Dolores's face darkened with rage. She whispered urgently to her attorneys. David called the notary who'd witnessed the deed modification. She testified that Vivian had been alert, confident, and had signed all documents without hesitation. "She was very clear about what she was doing," the notary said. "There was no confusion, no pressure, no signs of distress. She knew exactly what she wanted." Finally, David called Jennifer, Vivian's nurse friend. Jennifer testified about conversations where Vivian had explicitly discussed her estate planning. "Vivian told me she was protecting Dennis," Jennifer said firmly. "She said her mother had never accepted their marriage and would try to destroy Dennis after she died. She said putting the house in both their names was the only way to make sure he'd have security. She was protecting the man she loved from her vindictive mother." "Objection!" Dennison shouted. "Speculation and hearsay." "It's not hearsay when it's a statement of the deceased's intentions," Judge Morrison said calmly. "Overruled. Continue." When all the testimony was complete, Judge Morrison called a 30-minute recess. Dennis sat in the hallway with David, his heart pounding. "How do you think it went?" Dennis asked. "I think we demolished their case," David said confidently. "They had nothing but speculation and character attacks. We had evidence, medical records, witness testimony, and Vivian's own words. It's not even close." When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Morrison's expression was stern. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented today," she began, "and I'm ready to rule." Dennis held his breath. "The deed modification executed by Vivian Whitmore Erickson on January 8, 2023 was legal, proper, and valid. The evidence overwhelmingly shows that Miss Erickson was fully competent when she signed the document, that she acted of her own free will, and that she understood the implications of her decision. There is no evidence of coercion, undue influence, or fraud." Dolores's attorney started to object, but Judge Morrison held up her hand. "Furthermore," the judge continued, her voice hardening, "I find Mrs. Whitmore's actions in this case to be unconscionable. She has weaponized the legal system to harass her son-in-law during his time of grief. She has made baseless accusations, spread malicious rumors, and attempted to deprive Mr. Erickson of the home his wife wanted him to have. This court will not enable such behavior." Judge Morrison looked directly at Dolores. "The deed modification stands. The property belongs to Dennis Erickson. Mrs. Whitmore, you are ordered to cease all harassment and attempts to claim this property. If you continue this behavior, you will face sanctions." The gavel came down with a decisive crack. They had won. The courtroom erupted in controlled chaos. Dolores stood abruptly, her face flushed with fury. Her attorneys immediately surrounded her, speaking in urgent whispers. Across the aisle, David shook Dennis's hand with a broad smile. "Congratulations, it's over." Dennis felt numb. He'd won. The house was legally, irrevocably his. Dolores couldn't touch it. But the victory felt hollow because Vivian still wasn't there to share it with him. She'd given him this gift, this protection, this security, and he couldn't even thank her. "Mr. Erickson," Judge Morrison's voice cut through the noise. Dennis looked up to see her gazing at him with unexpected kindness. "I'm very sorry for your loss." Your wife clearly loved you very much." "Thank you, Your Honor," Dennis managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Dolores stormed out of the courtroom without a backward glance, her legal team trailing behind her. Dennis watched her go, expecting to feel triumph or satisfaction. Instead, he just felt tired. Outside the courthouse, David walked Dennis to his car. The January afternoon was cold and gray, matching Dennis's mood. "What happens now?" Dennis asked. "Now you go home," David said. "The property is yours, free and clear. I'll handle the final paperwork to make sure everything's properly recorded. Dolores can't appeal Judge Morrison's decision. There's no legal basis. It's done. She's going to hate me even more now." "Probably, but that's not your problem anymore. You don't have to engage with her ever again if you don't want to." Dennis drove home in a daze. The house looked exactly as it had when he left that morning, but somehow it felt different. Lighter, maybe. Or perhaps that was just Dennis himself, feeling the weight of uncertainty finally lift from his shoulders. He called his parents to tell them the news. His mother cried with relief. His father said gruffly, "That's my boy. Vivian would be proud." Jason texted congratulations and added, "Mom is furious, but she'll get over it. You did the right thing." That night, Dennis sat in the living room, where he and Vivian had spent countless evenings together. He pulled out her journal again and read more entries. One from February 2023, a month after she'd filed the deed modification, made him smile through his tears. "Dennis found out about the deed change today. I finally told him. He got upset, not because I did it, but because he hated that I had to protect him from my own mother. He said, 'I don't want you to worry about this stuff. You should be focused on getting better, not on legal documents.'" Sweet, naive Dennis. As if I could stop worrying about his future. As if I could leave this world without making sure he's taken care of. He doesn't understand that protecting him gives me peace. It's one of the few things I can still control. Dennis closed the journal and pressed it against his chest. Vivian had known him so well. She'd known he'd resist being protected, that he'd want to handle things himself, that accepting help made him uncomfortable. But she'd protected him anyway because that's what love was, caring for someone even when they insisted they didn't need it. The next few days were surprisingly quiet. Dennis had expected Dolores to retaliate somehow, but there was only silence. He returned to work in late January, 2.5 months after Vivian's death. His students welcomed him back with handmade cards and awkward but sincere condolences. Teaching was hard, harder than he'd expected. Every day felt like walking through fog, but it was also healing. His students needed him, and having a purpose beyond his grief helped. In February, Dennis received an unexpected visitor. He came home from school one afternoon to find Jason's car in his driveway. Vivian's brother was sitting on the front porch, looking uncomfortable. "Jason?" Dennis approached cautiously. "What are you doing here?" "Can we talk?" Jason asked. "Just for a few minutes?" Dennis unlocked the door and led Jason inside. They sat in the living room, the same room where Vivian had received her diagnosis, where she'd spent her final weeks on the couch watching old movies and pretending she wasn't dying. "I wanted to apologize," Jason said without preamble, "for Mom, for everything she put you through, for not standing up to her sooner." Dennis was surprised. "You don't have to apologize for your mother's actions." "Yes, I do, because I enabled them by staying silent." Jason looked around the room, his eyes landing on a framed photo of Vivian on the mantel. "Vivian was my big sister. She always protected me when we were kids. Mom could be intense, demanding. Vivian took the brunt of it so I wouldn't have to, and I never really thanked her for that." "She loved you," Dennis said simply. "I know, and she loved you. That was obvious to anyone who actually paid attention." Jason ran a hand through his hair, looking more like Vivian than Dennis had ever noticed. They had the same nose, the same way of tilting their heads when they were thinking. "Mom convinced herself that you were using Vivian, that you married her for money. But I saw how you were with her, especially during the cancer. You never left her side. You took unpaid leave from work to be with her full-time those last 2 months. You slept in a chair next to her hospital bed. That's not what a gold digger does." Dennis felt his throat tighten. "I would have done anything for her. I know, and Vivian knew. That's why she made sure you'd be taken care of." Jason pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. I found this in some of Vivian's things that Mom had. I took it before Mom could see it. I think you should have it. Dennis opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter in Vivian's handwriting, addressed to Jason and dated December 2023, just weeks before her death. Jason, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I need you to do something for me. Please look after Dennis. Not financially, I've taken care of that. But emotionally, he's going to be lost without me, and Mom is going to make his life hell. I know you can't go against Mom openly, but please, in whatever small ways you can, be there for him. Remind him that he was a good husband, that I loved him, that he made my life better. He's going to doubt all of that after I'm gone, because Mom will fill his head with poison. Don't let him believe her lies. Dennis is one of the best men I've ever known. He's kind and smart and funny, and he makes terrible puns that somehow always make me laugh. He works a job he loves, even though it doesn't pay much, because he genuinely wants to help kids. He never cared about my money or my family name. He just loved me. Really, truly loved me for who I was. When I die, I'm going to be at peace because I got to spend 6 beautiful years married to my best friend. Not everyone gets that. I was lucky. We were lucky. Please don't let Mom destroy that. Please help Dennis remember the good parts. I love you, little brother. Take care of yourself, and take care of him. Vivian. Dennis couldn't see the words anymore through his tears. Jason was crying too, not bothering to hide it. She was the best person I knew, Jason said roughly, and you made her happy. I saw it. We all saw it, even Mom, though she'd never admit it. They sat in silence for a while. Two men who'd both loved Vivian, both grieving her loss in different ways. Thank you for bringing this to me, Dennis finally said. It means more than you know. There's something else, Jason said. Mom is planning to sell the family business, the insurance agency that Dad built. She's been talking about it for years, but now she's actually doing it. She's getting older and she doesn't want to manage it anymore. The sale should net about $3 million. Dennis didn't understand why Jason was telling him this. Okay? Under Dad's will, Vivian was supposed to inherit a portion of the business value if it was ever sold. 20%. Mom's been avoiding the sale partly because she didn't want to give Vivian that money. She thought Vivian didn't need it since she had her trust fund. But now that Vivian is gone, that 20% goes to Vivian's estate. Which goes to me, Dennis realized. Which goes to you, Jason confirmed. That's $600,000, Dennis. Mom is legally obligated to pay it. Her attorneys have confirmed it. There's no way around it. Dennis felt like he'd been punched. $600,000. It was an unimaginable sum for someone who made $52,000 a year teaching history. I don't want her money. It's not her money. It's Vivian's. It's what Dad wanted Vivian to have. And since Vivian wanted you to have everything, it's yours. Jason stood up to leave. The sale is supposed to close in March. Mom is going to fight this, obviously. She's going to be furious. But the law is clear. That money is legally yours. After Jason left, Dennis sat alone with Vivian's letter in his hands. He read it over and over, memorizing every word, every loop of her handwriting. Even facing death, Vivian had been thinking about him, worrying about him, protecting him. The next month was a blur of legal proceedings related to the business sale. Dolores did exactly what Jason had predicted. She fought the inheritance distribution with every tool at her disposal. She argued that Vivian's share should go to Jason instead. She tried to claim the will was invalid. She attempted to tie up the sale in litigation. But David Chen, now familiar with Dolores' tactics, shut down each attempt methodically. The law was unambiguous. Vivian's share went to her estate, and her estate went to Dennis. There were no loopholes, no exceptions. In March, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Dennis received the largest direct deposit of his life. $600,000 minus taxes and legal fees appeared in his bank account. He stared at the number on his phone screen, unable to process it. He called David immediately. Is this real? It's real, David confirmed. The business sale closed yesterday. Dolores was required to distribute the inheritance. She tried to delay the payment, but the judge wasn't having it. The money is yours, free and clear. Dennis didn't know what to feel. The money was life-changing. He could pay off his car. He could finally fix the roof. He could put away for retirement. He could donate to the causes Vivian had cared about. He could establish a scholarship fund in her name. But none of it brought Vivian back. That weekend, Dennis did something he'd been avoiding for months. He went through all of Vivian's belongings, her clothes, her books, her jewelry, her nursing textbooks. He donated most of it to charity, keeping only a few precious items. Her favorite sweater that still smelled like her perfume, her grandmother's wedding ring, her collection of medical thrillers, her nursing school diploma. He found another note tucked into one of her textbooks, written in her neat hand on a torn piece of notebook paper. Dennis, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're finally going through my stuff. I know how hard this must be, but I want you to know something. You gave me the happiest 6 years of my life. Every single day with you was a gift. Don't let anyone, especially my mother, make you believe otherwise. You were exactly the husband I needed, exactly the partner I wanted, exactly the man I loved. Go live your life. Fall in love again if you can. Be happy. That's what I want for you. All my love forever, S. Dennis sat on the bedroom floor surrounded by cardboard boxes and cried harder than he had since the funeral. Vivian had left him notes everywhere, little love letters hidden throughout the house, each one a gift for future moments when he'd need her most. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you would have done in Dennis's situation. In April, 4 months after the court victory, Dennis made a decision. He couldn't stay in the house anymore. It wasn't Dolores's harassment driving him away. She'd gone conspicuously quiet after losing both legal battles and being forced to pay the inheritance. It was the memories. Every room held echoes of Vivian. Every corner reminded him of what he'd lost. He put the house on the market. The real estate agent told him it would sell quickly. The neighborhood was desirable, the house was well maintained, and the market was strong. She was right. Within 2 weeks, Dennis had multiple offers. He accepted one for $445,000, almost $60,000 more than Vivian had paid for it 6 years earlier. The closing was scheduled for late May. Dennis spent those final weeks sorting through the last of their belongings and saying goodbye to the home he and Vivian had built together. Neighbors stopped by to wish him well. His principal told him there was a position open at a school in Charleston near his parents if he was interested. Dennis was interested. It was time to go home. Time to start over. Time to build a new life that honored Vivian's memory without being imprisoned by it. The day before the closing, Dennis received an unexpected phone call from an unfamiliar number. He answered warily, half expecting Dolores's attorneys with some new legal challenge. "Dennis, it's Dolores." Dennis nearly dropped the phone. Vivian's mother hadn't spoken to him directly since the funeral. "Dolores, I'm calling because—" She paused and Dennis could hear her struggling with the words. "Because I owe you an apology." Dennis sat down, stunned. "You what?" "I owe you an apology," Dolores repeated, her voice stiff but sincere. "For everything, the eviction notice, the legal battle, the things I said about you, all of it. I was wrong." Dennis didn't know what to say. He waited. "Jason made me read Vivian's letter," Dolores continued. "The one she wrote to him. About you. About how much she loved you. How happy you made her. And I realized—" Her voice cracked slightly. "I realized I'd been so focused on what I wanted for Vivian that I never actually listened to what Vivian wanted for herself." "She wanted me," Dennis said quietly. "Yes, she did. And I couldn't accept that because you weren't what I'd envisioned for her. You weren't wealthy or prestigious or from the right family. You were just good, kind, devoted. And those things should have mattered more to me than money or status, but they didn't. I was a snob and a fool." Dennis felt something shift inside him. Not quite forgiveness, but maybe the beginning of it. "You hurt me, Dolores. During the worst time of my life, you tried to take away the one thing Vivian wanted me to have. I know, and I'm sorrier than I can express. I was angry at the world for taking my daughter, and I took that anger out on you. It was cruel and wrong." Dolores took a shaky breath. "I heard you're selling the house." "I am. I close tomorrow." "Where will you go?" "Charleston, near my parents. There's a teaching position waiting for me there. That's good. You should be near family. Another pause. Dennis, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect us to be friends or stay in touch. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. Vivian loved you. You loved Vivian. You made her happy. And that should have been enough for me from the beginning. Thank you for saying that, Dennis said. He meant it. I also want you to know that I'm establishing a foundation in Vivian's name for pediatric cancer research. I'm funding it with some of the money from the business sale. If you'd like to be involved in any way, on the board or just consulted on decisions, I'd welcome your input. Vivian would want you to be part of honoring her memory. Dennis felt tears prick his eyes. I'd like that. Good. I'll have my attorney, a different attorney, send you the details. Dolores's voice softened. Vivian was lucky to have you. I should have told her that when she was alive. I should have welcomed you into our family instead of fighting against you. I failed as a mother and as a mother-in-law. I'm sorry. After they hung up, Dennis sat in the empty living room of the house he was about to leave. The furniture was gone, sold or donated. The walls were bare, showing the lighter patches where pictures had hung. The house that had been so full of life and love and laughter was now just an empty shell. But it had served its purpose. It had been a sanctuary for him and Vivian. It had protected him from Dolores's wrath. It had given him security during the darkest time of his life, and now it was giving him the financial freedom to start fresh. The next day, Dennis signed the closing papers and handed over the keys. He walked out of the house one final time, paused on the front porch and looked back. Thank you, he whispered to Vivian, to the house, to the universe. Thank you for everything. He drove to Charleston that afternoon, his car packed with the few possessions he'd kept. His parents welcomed him home with tears and tight hugs. His old bedroom was waiting for him, temporarily, until he found his own place. The teaching position would start in August, giving him the summer to settle in and heal. Over the next few months, Dennis slowly rebuilt his life. He found a small townhouse near the ocean, nothing fancy, but cozy and bright. He started therapy to process his grief. He joined a gym and began running again, something he'd loved before Vivian got sick. He volunteered at the local library just like his mother had done his whole childhood. He didn't date. He wasn't ready. Maybe he never would be. But he was learning to be okay with that. Vivian had been the love of his life. If he never found that again, he'd still be grateful for the 6 years they'd had together. In August, Dennis started teaching at Marion High School in Charleston. His students were bright and curious and reminded him why he'd chosen this profession in the first place. He wasn't the same enthusiastic teacher he'd been before Vivian's illness. Grief had changed him, aged him, deepened him, but he was still good at what he did. His students responded to his quiet strength and genuine care. In November, 1 year after Vivian's death, Dennis attended the first board meeting for the Vivian Whitmore Erickson Foundation. Dolores was there, more subdued than he'd ever seen her. Jason attended with his wife. Several of Vivian's nursing colleagues had joined the board. Together, they planned fundraising events and research grants and awareness campaigns. It wasn't a reconciliation, exactly. Dennis and Dolores would never be close. The wounds were too deep, the betrayal too fresh, but they could work together to honor Vivian's memory. They could put aside their differences for something bigger than themselves. That evening, Dennis drove to Oak Hill Cemetery. He'd avoided it for months, unable to face Vivian's grave. But now, on the anniversary of her death, he felt ready. He brought flowers, sunflowers, her favorite. He sat on the grass next to her headstone and talked to her the way he used to talk to her in life. He told her about Charleston, about teaching, about the foundation. He told her about Dolores's apology and Jason's kindness. He told her about the house selling and the money she'd left him and how he was using it to build a good life. You took care of me, he said quietly. Even when you were dying, even when you should have been focused on yourself, you were still protecting me. You made sure I'd have a home. You made sure I'd have security. You made sure your mother couldn't destroy me. The November wind rustled the leaves on nearby trees. The setting sun cast long shadows across the cemetery. I'm going to be okay, Dennis continued. It took me a while to believe that, but I do now. I'm not the same person I was before. I'll never be that person again, but I'm okay with who I'm becoming. Someone who knows the value of love, someone who understands that protecting the people you care about is the highest form of devotion, someone who knows that wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the relationships you build and the lives you touch. He placed the sunflowers on her grave and stood to leave. "Thank you, Vivian," he said one more time, "for everything, for loving me, for protecting me, for teaching me what really matters. I'll carry that lesson with me for the rest of my life." As Dennis walked back to his car, he felt something he hadn't felt in a year. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. The acceptance that life goes on, that grief doesn't disappear, but becomes something you learn to carry, that love doesn't end with death but transforms into memory and gratitude. Dolores had tried to take everything from him out of spite and prejudice, but Vivian had made that impossible. Vivian's love had been stronger than Dolores's hate. Vivian's preparation had been more powerful than Dolores's wealth, and in the end, justice had prevailed, not through revenge or retaliation, but through the simple, profound act of a woman protecting the man she loved. Dennis drove home as the sun set over Charleston, grateful for the years he'd had with Vivian, grateful for the security she'd given him, and grateful for the lesson she'd taught him. That the best protection against cruelty isn't revenge. It's love that plans ahead, that thinks beyond itself, that builds fortresses of legal documents and careful preparation so that even death can't destroy what two people built together. Sometimes the strongest victory isn't fighting back. Sometimes it's simply being prepared. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courtroom battles or clever revenge schemes. Sometimes it comes from a dying woman who loved her husband enough to make sure he'd be okay when she was gone. And that love, that foresight, that devotion, that was worth more than any inheritance, any house, any amount of money. That was everything. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.